Podcasting from a little cabin on a hill. This is the Stacy Westfall Podcast. Stacy's goal is simple: to teach you to understand why horses do what they do, as well as the action steps for creating clear, confident communication with your horses.
Hi, I'm Stacy Westfall, and I'm here to teach you how to understand, enjoy, and successfully train your own horses. In this season, I told you that I was going to be giving you the behind-the-scenes insights into how I use the techniques that I've been sharing with you on my own horses. But today there's not a lot to update because my numbers are not looking great for this month. And when I look back over my calendar, I know that I traveled, I know the weather's been cold, but at the end of the day, what I know is that I've made some choices. So when I was sitting down to record today's podcast, I kept playing around with different titles. And the one thing that keeps coming back is self-awareness. And so I kind of want to illustrate self-awareness to you in a couple different ways. And the first way is going to be discussing my own horses and riding. And the second way is going to be by sharing an audio Q&A that I recorded originally for one person, but I've decided to share it with you today. So first, let's talk about the self-awareness idea around my own horses. So you know, if you've been listening to the podcast, that I shared a few episodes ago that my general goal for riding is to ride my horses 20 times a month. And that leaves me the flexibility for if I travel for 5 or 6 days, that I can make up for that. So if I kind of zoom in on it so tight that I think I want to do, say, 5 days a week, then what happens is I can feel that I can get really frustrated because if I have to travel and that overlaps into 2 different weeks, I can't hit my 5 rides on week number 1, and then I can't hit my 5 rides on week number 2, and then it's really tempting to throw in everything. I don't know if that happens to you. That happens to me. So anyway, I confessed a few episodes ago that 20 rides a month tends to work for me. But then I turn around and hear a few weeks later, I'm not going to hit that month. So I think the lesson there is twofold. Number one, I really at the end of it have to know how to deal with my own thinking when I don't hit the number. And I could do that inside of the 5-day a week, and I could learn how to deal with it there, or else I can change it around, say 20 times a month. And then if I have a month like this, I'm still going to get to deal with that here. But what I want to share with you so that you can identify some of the stuff I go through, so that if you go through any of this on your own, that you'll be like, okay, this happens to other people. So the first thing I want to talk about with this idea of not hitting this goal is technically I'm not to the end of the month. So technically I am aware that I could hit the goal if I rode every day and if I added a few days where I rode twice. So that's something I haven't really talked about before, but sometimes when I'm starting colts, there's times that I'll ride them a short ride in the morning, a short ride in the afternoon, because I can kind of double up and get more done and not physically exhaust them. So if I wanted to be creative, I could do some of that and then I could hit my goal. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing I'm aware of that I could do is I could blame the weather, or I could blame going out of town for business to that event. So I could basically blame some kind of external thing. Or maybe the most interesting one, I could just not say anything to you about it because I'm over here podcasting from my closet and you wouldn't know. But it doesn't even end there. So when I think about not hitting the goal, I realize that I'm aware that in the past, I have felt shame or I've been really angry at myself. And let me tell you, that's a great combination. If you've got shame and anger going on at the same time, you can really beat yourself up quite nicely. At least that's what I experienced in my past. So at the end of the day, when I start panicking about not hitting this goal, then what I really have to keep backing up to try to find is not necessarily if I can dance around and change the number of days that I ride, or whether or not I blame something outside of me. To me, that deeper question that has really helped me grow over the years has been like, what the heck's going on here? And at the end of the day, the thing that's going on for me a lot in the past that I'm aware of now is that maybe if I don't hit this goal, because I can kind of be a perfectionist, maybe I'm going to put something else on top of this. Like I'm going to make myself feel bad or guilty. I'm going to be angry at myself. And that is the self-awareness that I'm talking about. And that is also why I'm not going to go out and ride the horses twice a day. Not that they would mind, because I would go easy on them, but I don't need to go out there and save myself in that way, because really this is a mental game. This is a self-awareness mental game. I know all the choices I did to end up here. I remember the days that I was like, it's really cold. I don't think I'll ride. I'll probably make up for it later. And really, I know that in that day when I thought to myself, I'll probably make up for it later, I also know that there was a piece of my brain at that moment that was accepting the fact that I might not make up for it later, because I've got a very full plate of other things that I'm working on. So I can't just be dropping all of them. And I've made choices on that day to pick up something different because it was cold out and I would rather have been working on something other than going out and riding. And I'm going to own that now. But the reason I want to talk about that is so that, first of all, if you guys are in that situation, maybe it will somehow help you. But also because the second part of this podcast that I decided to do is I'd like to play for you an audio recording that I made after a young lady emailed me saying that she'd been assigned a school project to interview someone in the career field that she's interested in pursuing. And I emailed her back and I said, would you mind if I answered these 12 questions that you sent in audio form? Because that would just go pretty fast for me because I do audio quite a bit. And she said that would be great. And what I want you to listen for is, you'll hear me even talking straight to her because I intended this to be just sent straight to her. But now that I've decided to share it with you, what I want you to listen for is see if you can hear the self-awareness things that I'm talking about that you can hear have changed over my life in my business. Because when we get to the end of this is a Q&A pretty much about, becoming a horse trainer, the equine career path, that kind of stuff. And listen to the questions, listen to the answers, but one little piece of your mind, put it onto the idea of self-awareness and see if you can hear my self-awareness, because I've been working on it for years and I need to know if you can hear it. No, because I'm hoping that when you get to the end, you will identify with some of the things I'm going to talk about after you listen to this audio clip. Hi, Jillian. This will be my attempt at answering your questions. I'm going to try to keep it short and yet add enough information that they make sense, but I don't do a very good job of keeping things short typically. The first question, what inspired you to become involved in this career? My love of horses and my desire to pursue my curiosity around horses and what could be done with them, and my desire to continue learning. So it might be considered that classic, desire to follow that passion, because I do think that the horses can be one of those areas that people tend to be more passionate about. One of my other options was accounting, which there's nothing wrong with accounting, and I pay good money to a lot of accountants, but it would not have been a passion area for me. So I went with this passion area. Describe one of the challenges in your career. This question could go so many different ways, and I could have gone back into the past for a challenging moment, which will come up later. So I went with this. Overcoming the idea that horse trainers can't make much money. That was one of the challenges that I had, because it was like, horse trainers are always going to be broke. You have to go into a lot of debt, those kind of things that I had to push back against. Thank you, Dave Ramsey. And then I would say another huge challenge for me was learning what parts of the industry I really enjoyed and what parts of the industry I did not enjoy. I went to a seminar with the guy that teaches is Dan Miller, and he has a book called 48 Days to the Work You Love. And he said that often people made the majority of their wealth in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, particularly like between 50 and 60, because that's when people finally knew what they didn't like to do. Thought that was really interesting. And I would say it's totally true, because the more I learn about myself, what fits me, what doesn't fit me, the more targeted I get on what fits me, the better things work. So that was a big challenge. Don't even know that I would have understood it if somebody told it to me in my teens. So let me know, because I think that if you can understand that early on, which should be possible, but just doubting myself, that I think it would be a huge help. What is the most rewarding part of your job? The most rewarding for me is training a horse and then seeing them get it, or they have that light bulb moment, because horses can have those light bulb moments where they're like, I got it. And they get really excited about learning when it's done like that. And people the same way. So training people and having people have that light bulb moment where they're like, I got it. I finally got it. It's the same thing. Just sometimes it happens with horses. Sometimes it happens with people. And I love it in both places. Why did you choose to go to the University of Findlay and pursue this career path? So I didn't know that this was a career path until I was in a high school math class, and we got done a little early, and the math teacher asked everybody, he went around the classroom one at a time and asked each one of us what we wanted to do when we graduated. When he got to me, I said, I want to ride horses, but you can't go to school for that. And he responded with, leave right now, go upstairs to look through the college books until you find one that does offer horses as a college class. This was the pre-internet days, if you can imagine such a thing. So you had to actually look through physical college books. And I discovered that you could go to school for that. And as the University of Findlay, or a college, was the only thing I could see. I literally didn't even know the path existed until that conversation. Then I went up, saw that the colleges were offering this, some of them. Then that was the only path I could see. So then I just looked at what the top colleges were in the equine. And at the time it was Texas A&M and the University of Findlay. And Texas A&M had more specialty things like reproduction or nutrition. And the University of Findlay had more riding time and was slightly closer to Maine, being that it's in Ohio versus going all the way down to Texas. So I went to the University of Findlay for more riding time. And then I had my eyes open to how many different paths there could be to pursue this career. But for me, in Maine, no idea. Didn't even know it was a path. It was almost halfway a cocky teenager joke, like, yeah, sarcastically, I want to ride horses, but you can't go to school for that. So yeah, turns out you can. He was right. What qualities do you think a person in this career should possess? It kind of really depends on what area of the industry you want to focus on. So the biggest thing I can see is, in general, the love of the lifestyle. So I'm kind of answering a little bit skewed towards the trainer or what I've done, which has a lot of lifestyle involved in it, because we have horses at our house, which means they need to be fed twice a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You've got the stall cleaning. So there's very much a lifestyle wrapped up in the way that we built it. But if you didn't want everything the way that we have done it, you would just need to get creative about how you structured your life. And that's what I mean about there being so many options. You know, you could board horses at a facility, never have to feed or clean a stall, and you could run a lesson program where you never had to even own a horse. You could train horses that were not intended to go to show if you didn't like showing. If you do like showing, but you don't want to have to pay for the show bills, then you could train horses and have other people pay you to train and show their horses. And you could be a facility owner and just kind of oversee everything. You could be a facility manager. There are so many options that I think the thing is, it's like the qualities that the person should possess really are dependent or tied together with what they choose. And that's kind of, you're going to hear that echoed through some of these different questions. It's a little bit of, you got to find that thing where the two weave together well, the qualities that you naturally possess and the career that most makes sense because of those. What were some of the things you encountered in this job that you didn't expect? Again, so many different angles I could answer this from. The first one that came to mind was I saw the industry as kind of being like, oh, look, vets make money with horses and farriers make money with horses and jockeys make money with horses. And I've heard there's horse trainers, but I didn't see all of the options that there were. And I have friends that work in marketing, and I have friends that design products and sell those, and people that sell feed and nutritionists and people that train horses for a specific sport like reining or specific of like dressage or, people that haul horses around the country. I know people that give carriage rides and make a business out of doing that. You can go so niche, it's kind of interesting. Horse photography, writing articles. So there's so much more than just what I initially saw, and I did not expect that. Then more specifically in, being a horse trainer, I didn't even expect inside of being a horse trainer how many different ways you could do that. Early on when I was pregnant, I did a lot of 4-H riding lessons. I did a lot of coaching that fit the area of life that I was in at the time. Didn't even know that you could make so many different little choices inside of still basically hanging out a shingle saying I'm a horse trainer, but you can still inside of that go through tons of different changes. So that's another way to look at it. Does your job carry over into your personal life? Well, the way that we chose to do it, it does. So again, I know some people that do more of a 9 to 5. They go in, they work for somebody else. I know people that even teach lesson programs, but they don't own the facility or the horses. They don't schedule the lessons. They just show up, teach, and walk away. So that wouldn't necessarily have to carry over. Jesse and I chose to have a lot of carryover into our personal life. So we, you can see that really interestingly in different areas of the country. So there are pockets in Texas where there's a super heavy carryover, meaning you've got a whole bunch of people that train reining horses all living in a very small area. You see it in Arizona, you see it in Florida. There's different pockets around the country for different disciplines. But what happens is one of the reasons they congregate there is because they really do end up creating an entire lifestyle around it. So very common for these people that will be competing against each other. They'll also be eating at the same restaurant and, they'll be getting together for barbecues because it's kind of like living in a little bit of what happens at horse shows around our area more, which is that you get that community feel when you show up at a horse show. But imagine if all the people from the horse show all lived in a very small radius, you would actually create that atmosphere around. So we definitely carried a lot over into our personal life. We wanted our house to have a Western feel. We wanted our horses just outside of the door. We wanted people coming to our facility. So we didn't have, instead of us traveling to them or us traveling somewhere else, we wanted to bring it all here. So we did decide to kind of wind it all together all the way into our personal life because we kind of blend, it's like, as far as the accountant and the taxes and some of that is concerned, a lot of our horses are part of the business, but we all know they're also definitely like personal horses. So that's probably the heaviest carryover area. That and the fact that at this point, I don't think we've gone on an actual vacation that didn't involve going to some kind of a horse event. So even when we went to Australia, when we went to Germany or these different things, like we've managed to take our career, which was going to these places for the horses, and wind it into a personal vacation time because that's just how we've wound things together. Does this job suit your personality? Yes, more so now than in the beginning, because in the beginning, probably you could almost say I didn't know my personality as well. And so, for example, when I first started training for customers, I was training to try to please the customer. And that wasn't wrong, but I didn't realize that sometimes when I was feeling discomfort, sometimes it was because I was learning something new, or I could feel like maybe, say, the pressure of going to the show pen to show a horse and, oh no, like somebody's paying me to train their horse. What if I don't do really well? Like, what does this mean about me? What does this mean about my training? So there was a discomfort, but I didn't realize that it was a discomfort on lots of different levels. For example, I don't like training young horses towards futurities. I don't have anything against futurities, but personally, I think there are very few horses that are that mentally and physically mature at that age. But there are some people that make an entire career around it, and it doesn't fit me. So early on when I was trying to do that job, because I saw somebody else doing that job, I didn't realize that some of the discomfort was because it doesn't suit my, I'm going to say, you ask personality. I'm almost going to say like it doesn't fit my belief system is there. And so that can happen. Does this job suit your personality? Mine does right now, but I do see people come into this and they kind of struggle with it because maybe they see somebody like me who teaches and does a lot publicly on Facebook or the podcast or different things like that, which suits my personality. But then let's just say somebody's getting started and they think, oh, well, Stacy does a blog and a podcast and she makes these videos. If that doesn't fit your personality, it's not going to work for you like it's working for me. So I definitely see people, and there's some irony here. I see people that are behind the scenes people that do really well in these behind the scenes kind of roles, but then they feel like they should be the in front of the scenes person, which is a little bit more, that's the side of me you see. You don't see the side of me that's the behind the scenes. It's there too, but because it's behind the scenes, you're not seeing it. And so I've actually found a really good balance now of going back and forth like that. But I didn't know that early on. And that's one of those, things that I've learned. We're going to answer that question a little bit more further on. If you could change one thing about your job, what would you change? I would right now dare myself to coach people even more about the power of their thinking and self-development inside of this industry. But even as I read that sentence, I'm like, ooh, there's something wrong with saying that out loud. But I find it really interesting that we expect our horses to grow physically, mentally, and then what people see when they see the bareback and bridleless is they see a horse that has like an awareness and an understanding and a control of their emotion. And people don't even think about horses like this. I really don't believe they think about horses in this way. I do. And I want to teach that. But the scary side for me is like, then I would have to address that people need to understand their own selves and their understandings of themselves physically and mentally and this awareness of the emotions. And for me, I've always trained, if you look at my material, I've always trained from the point of view of the horse. And this next stretch would change me to, I'd have to talk more directly about people and people's emotions. And I get a little bit like, ooh, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that. And if you could change one thing about your job, what would you change? Can we invent self-cleaning stalls and get rid of mud? Those would be two things I would change about my job also. Do you have a role model that led you to where you are now? And if so, who and why? I would have to say that I have role model hopped as I've moved up the ladder. So I remember looking up to my mom and her empathy for animals. And a lot of the understanding that I have came from my mom's observations. Even though she wasn't highly trained with horses or dogs or whatever, her observations and her empathy for the animals made her observations very accurate. And it definitely influenced me. I remember some friends took me to a John Lyons clinic when I was in high school, and we just audited that. It was a seminar he did, and we were auditors, and I admired his bridleless riding. So I think that planted that seed for me to want to try that. And so I could say I looked up to him. I had his book. I think it's called Lions on Horses. I looked up to the instructors when I went to Findlay. I looked up to, and they were kind of role models for understanding the horses mentally and physically. And ironically, it was interesting. Like I was out there quite a ways away from home. That's my bird in the background. I was quite a ways away from home. And some of the instructors, I could tell that they actually cared about me as a person, and they were giving me advice, kind of like parents would. And even though I didn't necessarily understand it at the time, I could feel it. And that's a little bit of that impact that I can feel I want to have now. So I would say they were role models. And I looked up to Jesse when I met him. He really understood how to train reining horses. He understood the industry. He was really passionate about it. And so I would say that was a role model situation. I've looked up to a lot of different business leaders in other areas, which I really love looking at completely unrelated industries. For example, I have a friend, so it's actually more like somebody my mom's age. It's a friend of the family who runs a multi-million-dollar roofing company. And I love sitting in and listening to the principles that he uses that I can easily carry over, because life principles are life principles. It doesn't matter if you're training horses or running a multi-million-dollar roofing company. You're going to find life principles. Then that's the things I look for. So even somebody like that has been a role model. And I love reading a lot of books. I read books on obnoxious numbers of books on business, life, and self-development. I used to do, when Jesse and I would drive a long ways, I would be the one that rented books at the Cracker Barrel on audio. And it would be like, improve your public speaking. And it would put everybody in the car to sleep except for me. And I'm hanging on every word of this like business improvement book. So I was a really good driver like that for everybody to sleep. I love everything Seth Godin writes. The book Start With Why, the book Failing Forward, the book The War of Art, the book Daring Greatly, and so many more. Every author has moved me forward. And how would you advise somebody entering the field to get started? I would say get started and know that you will grow and you will change and you will learn. Changing paths or modifying your path is not a failure. It's actually a sign of growth. And I still change careers as often as the world would say. I haven't actually read about it lately, but they used to say that, people would change careers every 3 to 4 years. I for sure change career paths every 3 to 4 years. I just happen to stay inside the industry. So I think when people don't look at that nitty gritty of it, they might think, oh, Stacy's been doing the same thing for 20 years. But if you look closer, I have not been doing anything close to the same thing for 20 years. I'm constantly modifying slightly because I really like reinventing myself due to my curiosity. And I really have a need, or at least a desire, to grow. I'm just really passionate about growth and lifelong learning. There's a challenge in making a new leap when things are working. So what I mean by that is that, my business was going along and it's working as a horse trainer, but I decide that I want to start making DVDs and teaching people in a different way. And that's a different leap. So that's a really challenging leap to make when things are working and you want to change them. And that's a real challenge. So that's more on, if I'm advising somebody, it's going to be like, yeah, things might even be working. And then you still might want to make a change because you can make them work better, or maybe you've grown and you want to change. Are there any pitfalls that someone new to the career should avoid? Oh, this one's another big one. And so at first I wrote down, know your goals and choose your boundaries, because you can change them as you go, but you've got to be aware of them. So an example of that would be like for goals, if you have any really big goals in life, keep them in mind first. An example that would make sense to share would be that I decided that when we got married, I was like, okay, we talked about having kids. I want to have the kids early because I know myself well. And I know once I get started going down this training and career path, I've seen other women who did not. They wanted kids, but they didn't put it as a priority, and they kept putting it off. And there is kind of an expiration date on at least like natural birth on that. And so I didn't want to let go of that one. So that big goal of having kids was forefront so that I knew I wanted to hit that one. So that's an example of know your goals, the really big ones. It's not like you have to know every nitty gritty one, but if there's some big rocks, like when you have that whole analogy of, adding those big rocks first, the more you can know about some of those really big ones, the better, because some of those, it's going to impact the direction and the course of your life some. And then boundaries, I'm going to say know your boundaries. And again, you can change your goals and you can change even your boundaries, which I'm going to explain in a minute, but you got to know them and identify them. So the boundaries, I would say one example of that, just to get you on the same page, would be it's the lines that you won't cross for whatever reason. You won't cross it for money. You won't cross it for fame. You won't cross it to get that client or keep that client or whatever other temptation might come your way. So a super clear example that's going to be easy for you to identify is like one of my boundaries is I won't drug a horse to show it or ride it or whatever. So I won't drug a horse. That's a really clear line in the sand. People would all be able to be like, oh, yeah, I understand that it's easy to see that you can fall on one side or the other of that. Yes, there are people that fall on the side of they do think that's okay. And they've even published themselves in national magazines saying, I don't see a problem with drugging and showing a horse. So that's an example. But this next one is way more gray. So personally, another boundary is I won't push a horse beyond what I believe is necessary. And that is one of those better examples of like kind of a moving line. So that would be an example where when I say I was uncomfortable early on, people would be like, I want you to show my horse at this show at this time. And early on in my career, I might have pushed that horse and been like, okay, we have to show on August 1st because the owner really wants you shown on August 1st. And when I was feeling discomfort, it was a mix of discomfort on like, I don't even like showing, mixed with, I'm not sure that pushing this horse is this good, mixed with, I don't want to disappoint the customer. And so there were a lot of different things going on there. But now I'm much more clear on where I will and won't push the horse and that I will say no to a customer or no to different things. And that's a line that I had to develop. And it's a line that moved around. And I think that's why when I reference back to the Dan Miller quote, I think that's one of those things where as it got more solid over the years, it's way more clear to me that as I get older, those lines are much more clear and they don't move nearly as much as they did when I was younger. So I hope you found that really helpful. That was really interesting to do. So thanks for asking me all the questions. And if you have any more, send them on in. Well, what'd you think? The perfectionist in me wants to go back and make it better, but with self-awareness, I'm aware that it will never be perfect enough. So there it is. The other thing that this reminded me of was the equine career conferences that I organized and held in 2016 and 2017, which brings me back to the memory of the very first podcast I started more than a decade ago. It only had about 7 episodes before I stopped doing it, but that's a whole nother story. But it was titled Your Horse Career. And I'm going to have to pull up those audio files and take a listen because now I'm just curious. But the equine career was really fun for me because obviously if I've started a podcast around it, I've held 2 conferences and I talk about it a lot. I really enjoy helping people who want to have a career in the horse industry because I remember fighting through all of these different limiting beliefs like horse trainers can't make any money or all of these other things that I talked about. And I can see a light on the other side of it. And I want to help other people who have that same passion. But the exciting thing about the group when it came together for those conferences was that I was able to find a group of people to help teach and attendees that were all really passionate about the topic. And then what surprised me that was kind of not on the syllabus or outline was how much of life we ended up talking about. So in the Q&A sessions and when people would raise their hands, we ended up talking a lot about what I would end up calling mindset or decision-making or self-awareness type things, because at the end of the day, you bring you to whatever you do. I have to read one of my favorite quotes to you. It's by James Michener, and I have posted it and read it, and I just love it. So here it goes again. I think it's the first time on the podcast. It says, "The master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his information and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues a vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he is always doing both. Oh, I love that quote. And what I'm super excited about is that I have found someone to team up with who does specialize in understanding the thought processes and the human mind. I think I specialize in the horse mind, and I help humans understand that. And Ginny Talego, who you have heard on this podcast, specializes in helping people. And we are teaming up, and in April, July, and October of this year, we are doing workshops together here at my house. And in April, we're talking about goal setting and problem solving. And in July, the topic is leadership and communication. And in October, it is teamwork and feedback. And if you have an interest in equine career, I'm telling you, these are going to help you, because after my experience of being at the 2 equine career conferences that I held with groups of other professionals, these are the types of topics that are largely going to affect not only your equine career, but your life and your horse training. So it really doesn't matter that much if you're interested in approaching goal setting from a business perspective or goal setting from a personal perspective. When you learn about these things that we're going to be teaching with goal setting and problem solving or communication or teamwork or any of these subjects, they cross back and forth, just like that James Michener quote that I just shared with you. Not to mention, you can totally hear all of this episode talks about the rider's mind. And if we can't get your mind straight, it's going to be really hard for you to turn around and pass it on to your horse. So, life, business, horses, fun, work. Yeah, Jillian, my life is all tangled together in a beautiful way. And that's all I have for you this week. Let's see if I ride my horses before the next podcast. And thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you again in the next episode.
If you enjoy listening to Stacy's podcast, please visit stacywestfall.com for articles, videos, and tips to help you and your horse succeed.